Welcome to the Built for More podcast. This is for the woman who wants to get the most out of herself in fitness, business, and in life. So if you want to learn the skills, the strategy, and the mindset to get the most out of your body, your mind, and your business, you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Built for More podcast. Today we're going to be talking about PCOS and infertility. So many women are told at a young age that they're going to struggle to conceive, and for a lot of them, that fear stays with them for years. Today, I'm joined by someone who was told exactly that and is now pregnant. She's someone I've worked with very closely over the years. She actually started as a client of mine, and over time, we became good friends through our shared passion for women's health. Since then, she's gone on to build an incredible career as a nutritionist and naturopath. She founded her own clinic, Orenda Women's Health, an online nutrition and naturopathic clinic specialising in skin and reproductive health. What makes this conversation today most powerful is her own personal journey. At just 19, she was diagnosed with PCOS and told, like so many women, that she would struggle to conceive. Later on, she was also diagnosed with adenomyosis, adding another layer to that story. But then, at 31, she conceived naturally within 2 months of trying. So today, we're going to unpack exactly how she's supported her body to do that. Jacinta, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. And I think being able to share like a personal experience is really rewarding for me because I know so many women struggle. So I think hopefully today we can just have even just a handful of listeners being able to resonate and know that there's things that they can do.
100%, because I think there is a lot of fear around this topic. And I want to start exactly there with your personal story. So I'd love you to wind back the clock for us and tell us what happened at 21 years old when you were told that you're going to have difficulties conceiving.
So from when I first got my period, they were always irregular, they were always delayed and never predictable. I never had any issues with pain or anything like that at all. And I actually didn't have the acne either. And years and years went on, Mum always just told me, you probably have PCOS or it'll just take a bit of time maybe for your cycles to regulate as well. And then when it was somewhere between 19 to 21 years old, then I went and had blood tests, I had an ultrasound, and they had confirmed PCOS. At the time, the GP had actually said to me, "So do you have a partner?" And I did. I was in a relationship from when I was young, but I was very young. And he had said, well, I would recommend that you try to conceive before you're 21. So I would have been 19 at that age, before you're 21, because it's going to be really hard for you later on. And he then went on and said, the only thing you can then do to regulate your cycles is to go on the pill. And of course, in that moment, you think that's going to be the only option. But from when I grew up, I always had just this natural mindset of things. As a kid, I actually had this book that I would always read, and it was called Nature's Causes and Cures. So it would go through a list of all different conditions people would have and then the natural cures for that. So I was always just in this mindset of that there's alternative ways to do things, and I denied the pill. And I guess that's maybe the difference between my timeline and a lot of other women's, because often a lot of people just have that as the option of you have to go on the pill, and instantly at the age of 19, of course, you're not going to think anything different, that there's other options of what you can do. But I just stuck to my guns and I was like, no, that's fine. Look, I don't want to be on the pill. I don't want to take a medication. But then within a few years, I had my own experience working with a naturopath and was able to regulate my cycles naturally as well.
Yeah, okay. It is crazy to me that you were so naturally and holistically minded at such a young age, because I feel like a lot of people don't even know that that's an option at that point. Like all they know is if you have a problem, you go to the GP. So yeah, you denied the pill at such a young age. Have you ever been on any sort of hormonal contraceptive then? Or?
No.
Wow.
Which again, is quite rare for some women to never be on a hormonal contraception. I think I just didn't. It seemed strange to me to have something foreign controlling my body. And I completely, I don't have any negative association with the pill in the sense of if clients decide to take the pill, completely up to them. I think some people do get some benefits from it too. But for me, it was just something that I naturally just felt like I didn't want to be on. And I'm glad that I chose that direction, and then spent majority of my 20s really just trying to learn a lot about my body, what it needed. And I tuned in a lot about, my diet, exercise and stress and all the different things, and could watch in real time what would happen to my period when any of these other life variables changed.
Yeah, that's so cool. I feel like people are becoming a lot more aware about this stuff nowadays, but I definitely think like at that young age, a lot of people just have no idea about any of that stuff. So I think that's a really cool story. I want to know how it felt to you at that time. Obviously, the doctor suggested getting pregnant before 21, which is a pretty big decision to be making then. I know a lot of the time, like our partner at that age doesn't end up becoming our life partner as well. So that was some, crazy advice.
Crazy advice, yep.
But how did it make you feel in that moment, knowing that you wanted to be a mum? Because I feel like from what I know, you've always like wanted to be a mum, right?
Yeah, yep. I think you always have like that little, like I definitely had that bit of fear that came in because, of course, doctors sometimes are placed on a little bit of a hierarchy of, okay, they're the profession, they know everything. I have to follow that kind of advice. So I think there was an element of fear, but I didn't fully give in to that narrative either. So I think there was elements of worry, but and even actually when it came closer to me trying to conceive, I did have it in the forefront of my mind, okay, it might take a certain amount of time. But I think because I did my nutrition and naturopathy course and was finished within my early 20s to like mid-20s, I also knew, okay, well, if something doesn't happen naturally, there are medical interventions to bring on ovulation to help to try to support fertility in that sense. And I learned a lot more about it. So I think as I got older, that fear really took a step back because I learned the facts of what was actually the likelihood of what could potentially happen, and to not just trust that first piece of advice that you get given as well.
Yeah, 100%. And that's so good and incredible that you've been able to try and silence that, because I do think that's something that sticks with a lot of women for a really long time. Like I know and see it in my client base when I have people with PCOS and other hormonal conditions, that when they get to that point where maybe they are getting a little bit older, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared. I've been told it's going to be hard for me to conceive. So I think it is something that can really live and impact a lot of women for a really long time. Let's fast forward to where you are now. Yeah. So you are pregnant. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
How far along are you now?
17 weeks today, actually. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Which is crazy to think I'm almost halfway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in the lead up, I focused a lot on trying to do as much preconception prep as I could for myself, for my husband, and that way we could try to set ourselves up in the best position that we could be in. But yeah, like you said at the start of the podcast, it only took me 2 months to conceive, which I was really grateful for.
Yeah.
I went into trying to conceive with the expectation of the general average that it takes 6 to 12 months and mostly less than 20% chance each cycle to actually conceive. So I had that in the forefront of my mind that, okay, it will be nice if I were to conceive at some point in the next 12 months whilst we're trying to actively conceive. So I think that also probably helped to relieve the pressure a little bit. But then, of course, such a blessing that it also happened so quickly.
Yeah. Is that stat just for any woman or for PCOS specifically?
No, that's for any woman. Yeah. Okay. I guess, and we might get into this a little bit later, but I guess the thing with the PCOS element is because there's less chances of ovulation in the year, then that reduces the likelihood of conception in the course of a year because there's less opportunities that come about.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we're definitely going to dive into what you did to prep your body, and also interesting that you mentioned you had your partner doing stuff too. So I'm looking forward to unpacking that. But I'd love to firstly understand, so what is it exactly? You've kind of just mentioned it with the ovulation is not necessarily happening every cycle with PCOS, but what is it happening in both a PCOS setting, but also if you have like adeno or endometriosis, what is actually happening in the body that is stopping you or making it harder for you to conceive?
So first with PCOS, you have irregular menstrual cycles. So for some women, that could be anywhere from 35 days, that like every 35 days they're getting a period, to every 60 to 70. I've had some clients up to 100 days, like every 100 days they're getting a period. So what we do know, and it's very different to what they teach us in high school, you can't fall pregnant every single day of the month. There's only a particular fertile window that you can conceive. And with that period of time, when it comes to that is ovulation, for women that have PCOS, they ovulate less frequently because essentially what happens is once you ovulate and you release the egg, if you don't conceive, you then get your period in 2 weeks' time. For women that have PCOS, because they have longer menstrual cycles, they may not ovulate day 14, they may ovulate day 28, day 35, day 44, whenever that might be for them. So in that period of time, they're in the course of let's say 6 months, they probably could just ovulate 3 to 4 times in that period of time, depending on what their length of their menstrual cycles are like. So then, of course, you compare that to someone that doesn't have PCOS. You've then had one woman that had 6 opportunities in 6 months, and then another woman that maybe only had 3 because she only had 3 fertile windows. So the first thing is there's less chances of ovulation, so you have less opportunities to conceive. The other element is with PCOS, you have the hyperinsulinemia, so the high insulin secretion because of blood sugar dysregulation. We know blood glucose in excess is inflammatory, so then we have the added element of the quality of the egg being potentially impacted because of the high glucose, and the high glucose causing damage to the DNA and damage to the egg. And again, that's why when we're thinking about PCOS, our key treatment aims are always blood sugar dysregulation as number one, because that's going to be supporting the frequency of ovulation, but also the egg quality at the same time. With adenomyosis, it's a little bit different because with adenomyosis, you don't have the infrequent menstrual cycles. So women with adenomyosis will more than likely still ovulate every single month or every single time they get a cycle. And they mostly just present with symptoms like the heaviness of their period and pain. For me, it was mostly pain. I didn't get much of the heaviness. So it's not the actual symptoms itself that impacts the fertility aspect. It's more so the localized inflammation that's associated with adenomyosis, because that impacts the implantation as well. So when we're thinking about conception, we need to ovulate frequently, we need to have good egg quality, and we need to make sure everything is in perfect alignment for implantation to actually happen. And the element of implantation itself, it requires the immune system to kick in. And it's actually a little bit of an inflammatory process that happens when implantation occurs. And if there is a lot of too much inflammation that's happening because adenomyosis is so local to the area, that can stop the implantation. But adenomyosis and endometriosis itself, they're both proliferative conditions, which means they both secrete estrogen locally at the site. And if there's too much estrogen that's being secreted in that area and that's inhibiting the action of progesterone, you don't get the benefit of the progesterone that's there to support the implantation and to maintain the pregnancy. And this is where you can see in some cases, some women can experience frequent early miscarriages, such as chemical pregnancies. And that can often be because the progesterone didn't help to maintain the pregnancy sufficiently enough. And that can be because that estrogen was opposing the action of the progesterone. And that can come down to the adenomyosis and the endometriosis causing issues there.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting and I'm sure insightful for a lot of listeners, because it's not just the one thing. There's actually multiple pathways in both of these conditions that are impacting our ability to conceive. And it's really interesting that you mentioned the overall inflammation levels, because I think people are not aware of how much chronic and systemic inflammation can impact our body in so many different ways. So yeah, I think that's really insightful and I would love to unpack that a little bit more. But I want to jump firstly to the messaging around the difficulty that is going to come about with conception for women that have these conditions. Do you think that narrative is actually causing more harm than good in people?
Absolutely, because in majority of cases, there is somewhat of a solution, whether it's naturopathic intervention, that involves diet, lifestyle, herbal supplements, whether it is medical intervention to support that. But majority of cases that I see that struggle with fertility in the long run are usually the more complex cases when they can't find an issue and it's an unexplained infertility case, which generally we then also still find other things that might be causing problems. But often in the cases of adenomyosis, endometriosis, and PCOS, there are treatment plans and things that you can do to help a woman conceive. So definitely the narrative, it's huge. Like I have clients that have seen me before they even have a partner, and that was me. Like I remember seeing naturopaths saying, hey, I don't even have a partner, but I know that my cycles aren't right and I need help because in 5 to 10 years' time, I will want to have a kid and I need things to be better by then. And you can see the fear that a lot of women have because I'm seeing more and more in my clinic, the conversations are happening 2-3 years before they're thinking of conceiving.
Yeah, 100%. And I see this a lot in my client base. Is obviously I work with a lot of women with these conditions, but I also work with a lot of women with none of these conditions and a lot of women that are trying to fall pregnant. And something that's really interesting that I see is that a lot of these women with PCOS or endo that maybe thought they were going to have difficulties actually don't. And they just conceive so quickly.
Exactly.
And they're like, wow, I was not expecting that. But then other women that had no issues and thought it would be a breeze are really struggling. Mm-hmm. What do you think explains that?
Yeah, very good question because there's a lot of complexities to fertility. So with that, that's where a lot of women get the classic, this is unexplained infertility. They can't describe exactly what's causing it. In those particular cases, that's where we actually look at things in a lot more detail with their hormonal profile, day 2 or day 3, their post-ovulation hormones as well. We look at things like homocysteine, which is a really good marker that shows us if methylation and DNA replication is an issue. That's particularly important more so for the women that are having recurrent miscarriages as well. Always a huge flag that they need to get that tested. We'll also then look at thyroid function, like a full thyroid panel, insulin function, nutritional status, and so on. And it's often one of these elements that's then impacting, again, those same key areas: egg quality, the lining, and also implantation. Plus, we've also then got to consider the partner. And that's also a huge thing as well, because I've lost count of the amount of times a woman has gone through so much testing and treatment before the husband's even investigated. And that's just a huge red flag for lack of duty of care to explore all options.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget that it takes 2 to tango in this setting.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's quite interesting that we just put so much emphasis on what's happening in the woman's body. It's like, well, actually equal parts need to contribute to this, really.
Absolutely. And I think just another thing on that note of how you were saying, like a woman that doesn't have an actual diagnosis of something, why is it difficult for them to conceive? We also need to think about other elements that can impact hormone production. So what I often see is also some women that are excessively exercising, they're very stressed, they're under eating. That can lead them to low estrogen production. And that low estrogen production will impact the lining, which will impact the implantation. And these it's not a diagnostic. So they don't, if they were to go and get standard testing, it may not be picked up because their hormones aren't being read through that specific lens, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's important too, because yes, they might be healthy aesthetically, like they may not be overweight, they may be moving well, they may be eating well, but then there's other elements that, you know, that are a factor because of things like their stress or their hormone production.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when it comes to looking at our hormonal blood work when we go to the doctor, because estrogen does fluctuate heaps throughout the month. So a lot of the time they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's normal. But for the stage of the cycle, it might not be. Mm-hmm. And that's where I do think bringing in that more holistic medicine is really helpful for women struggling with this. And I always say, I've said it before in this podcast, like this is not that the medical system has no place. There absolutely is a place for that in infertility journeys. But I think if you are looking to optimize your hormones, that the holistic path is going to be more effective for that.
Absolutely. And then just to add a little bit more, we've also got to consider and this obviously dates back to things that are out of our control, but like the little egg that we were originally was in our grandmother. So we've also got to think, well, what was the health of our mum and what was the health of our grandmother? Because those things there can also then determine and impact your fertility in the sense that, you know, in an extreme, let's say there's a woman that's going through chemotherapy or something like that, that will absolutely impact her ovaries. For some women, they're extremely lucky and then they go on and conceive even after that instance. But there are things like that that we need to consider in the big picture, that when it comes to a situation where a woman is trying and they're ticking all the boxes, they're doing all the right things, and I've seen it time and time again, they're doing all the right things. Sometimes it can also just be a genetic susceptibility because of their family, their family history.
That's so interesting how far that can potentially date back. Yeah, you mentioned when women are really doing all of the right things, and something that I also see a lot of, and I'm sure you've seen this too, when women put so much pressure and emphasis on getting pregnant, I feel like, and this might be a little woo-woo, but I feel like the stress that they're creating around it can often impact their ability to conceive. Like, what's your take on that?
Absolutely. Well, I think we know cortisol in itself, if there is that chronic kind of stress response that's being activated, the cortisol can deplete your progesterone levels over time. But
literally exhibit A.
You can feel it. And that cortisol itself, it's inflammatory. It dysregulates your glucose response as well. So I think the downfall is the impact that that chronic stress response has on things like ovarian function and thyroid function as well. And I think there's just, like you said, a bit woo-woo, but you just can't explain it. Sometimes there's some people that they're like, I was on a holiday and then I conceived, and it was just because I didn't have this pressure for things to happen. I think the other thing is for everyone to also remember back to those stats that we went through before. Like, I remember when I had started to conceive, my naturopath who specialises in fertility had said to me, Jacinta, just remember it's an average of 6 to 12 months. So if nothing happens, it's not that something's wrong. It's just also a normal pattern. And I think that's sometimes also a good reminder, because sometimes, you've got your best friend that fell pregnant the first month, or someone that fell pregnant and they weren't even trying. And I think remembering those statistics are important if you're 3, 4, 5 months in and you're like, why isn't this happening as well?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think women can balance caring about their fertility and wanting to do all those right things without becoming so consumed by it?
It's a very big question, because when you live in a world that everything seems toxic, like plastics, now people say you can't even touch the receipts that you get from shops in case you're getting something on you. I think the most important thing is looking back to what is actually relevant to you, because there's a lot of information that's out there, but not all of it is going to be specific to the person that is the client that is in front of you. So, for example, when I'm working with clients, if they're struggling to conceive or if they're just trying to prep for conception, I might talk to them generally about things like environmental toxins and how that can impact them. But the conversation might be a little bit different with someone that is in the preconception phase or just trying to conceive, compared to someone that's maybe 3, 4 years down the track, where every other avenue has almost been explored, but their toxic load. And that changes the conversation. So I think the key thing is look at the variables that are going to be the most problematic for you as an individual according to your lifestyle, and work with those variables rather than trying to feel like you have to tick every single box. Because if you do feel like you've got to tick every single box, you've almost got to go and live in a bubble with like nothing around you, because it's just, otherwise it can just become way too consuming. I think for me, in my personal history, I've gone through the journey of when health becomes too much, and then you develop this whole orthorexia. And like when I was young, I was seeing a psychotherapist because I was like, I can't even decide what I want for breakfast because I'm too scared because I don't know what I'm going to eat for lunch. And then what about this snack, and what's the numbers, and what's the ingredients, and what's that? And I had to work with them to really kind of work through all the stress and the underlying beliefs and everything that had. And I saw the stress that it put on me. And I think that in that kind of position where you're trying to control and not do wrong and trying to perfect everything. It actually is just a cascade for so much more stress and anxiety in your body. So I think it's just a matter of also making sure you're frequently checking in with yourself to see how much is this actually consuming me and what needs to stay and what needs to go.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the more you know, sometimes it can actually work against you because like you said, you're so aware of like the power of nutrition and trying to like balance every choice perfectly throughout the day, where it's really not that deep as long as you're following like the general principles. I also see that a lot in period recovery clients where when they know so much about the body, like they're tracking and monitoring every single symptom and then they just get so fixated and consumed by it. And I almost feel like it works against them in that setting too. And then they create all this stress around, am I getting my period? Did I just ovulate? Like,
that's right. What's my mucus doing today? And then they're just like, oh, and what was my heart rate? And did it go too high? And like, And that, I think when you get to a point where it becomes your thought every single day, all day, and of course fertility, like it does, like because it's a huge thing, you want to start a family, but there's got to be a middle ground between actively making decisions towards your health and recognizing the point where it's becoming too consuming and too much. Yeah,
100%. I'd love to know where you think a woman that has been told she'll struggle to conceive because of PCOS or adenomyosis, why do I keep combining those two words?
Adenomyosis.
It's like one just say one, really hard one. Or endometriosis. I know what these words are. But if you've been told you've got a condition like that and you're going to struggle to conceive, where do you start?
Yeah. So there is obviously two routes of medical intervention, and this is where it's important to recognize what you're going to get from the healthcare professional that you're seeing. If you're going to see the GP, you're going to get medical intervention. Unless it's a holistic GP, you're not going to get diet and lifestyle advice. If you choose to work with a naturopath or a nutritionist, they're first going to really help you understand and focus on education. So the very first thing with someone with PCOS is always making sure you're learning how to actually track your cycles. And for everyone, that's different. For me personally, I went down the route of looking at the basal body temperature, which I can get into a little bit later too. And understanding your ovulation, number one, is the most important thing. So whether you're working with a fertility coach that teaches you natural cycle tracking, or whether you're working with a naturopath that also understands it in a lot of detail too, the first thing, because even before you do any intervention, diet, lifestyle, or anything like that, understanding your ovulation means you can understand your fertile windows and you know the times that you need to actively try to conceive, regardless of the variables of inflammation or anything else. You know the time, and that is empowering itself. The next thing on that train of thought, like when you're working with a naturopath, is always then look at getting your hormones tested. Like I said, day 2, day 3, and post-ovulation testing as well. And looking at insulin levels as well. And looking at potentially a glucose monitor. I love glucose monitors.
Yeah, I saw you were doing that yourself for quite a while.
So helpful. When I did the glucose monitor, the thing that caused the biggest spike of my glucose was actually a protein bar.
Yeah, right.
And I realized it was because it didn't have any fat. It was just protein and 1 teaspoon of brown rice syrup, and my glucose went through the roof.
Did you make it yourself, or was it like
No, it was a brand. I don't know if I can say it, but
defame the brand.
I know. I'm just like, I'm not sure. Yeah. But it was, and I love them. They were really nice. Yeah. It was a chocolate chip cookie dough one, and so I think understanding that is important. So that's another step for PCOS clients. Understand your individual blood glucose triggers, because they can also be different person to person, and work with a naturopath or a nutritionist to help them understand what your individual dietary composition might need to look like. There are interventions like your herbal remedies and stuff that you can jump onto to regulate your cycles, and they work incredibly well. So I think the very first step for anyone with PCOS is see a naturopath, because they're going to work with you to educate you and to correct imbalances that are there. When it comes to adenomyosis, it's also the same thing as well. So you can definitely get testing done, like vaginal microbiome testing, gut microbiome testing, to see if there's any kind of infection that might be driving the inflammation that's causing the adenomyosis. But a huge part of adenomyosis is nervous system regulation as well. So again, working with the naturopath will help you to recognize that and to see where you can intervene. But I think it's also important to just be very reflective and see in your own life what kind of things might need to change, and not accepting that it's like, well, I can't change anything. Well, sometimes things have to change and you have no choice for things to
100%.
change.
Yeah, if you're wanting to make like significant improvement in your health, sometimes you have to make sacrifices and really look and assess and make changes to your habits. I wanted to touch on herbal medicine. I think you mentioned how powerful they can be for shifting your hormones. And I've seen this in myself and in clients as well that have potentially been really struggling with period recovery, and then they'll bring in like herbal medicine put together by a naturopath, and then boom, they can get their cycle back. I think people underestimate how powerful herbs are. It's almost like we think pharmaceuticals is going to be the strongest intervention, but herbs are powerful. Like I would say equally as powerful as medicine.
Absolutely. And the herbs that you choose are really dependent on your individual hormonal profile. So what I mean by that is with PCOS, you can have a high estrogen picture and you can have a low estrogen picture. And that's because with PCOS, there's usually always a high testosterone element in the scenario, and high testosterone converts into estrogen. In some cases of PCOS, the testosterone or the enzyme that converts the testosterone to estrogen doesn't work sufficiently enough. So you get all this testosterone and you get no estrogen because it's not converting down. That was the case with me. So with my herbs, they were really specific on building estrogen and supporting that enzyme to work properly. And I was probably on those herbs for maybe like a year or a year and a half before I started to conceive. Whereas in some cases of PCOS, they have really high testosterone, their enzyme's working fine, and they're getting really high estrogen at the same time too. And the herbs that I use would have been completely contraindicated for that type of client as well. So the herbal remedies, they work incredibly well. The key thing that we need to remember with herbs is it takes time for things to work, because right now not my body because I'm pregnant, but your body is deciding what egg it's going to release this is recorded in April, so May, June, July. So it'll decide what egg it's going to be released in July. So you need time for those herbs to kick in to help with regulating that connection between the brain and the ovaries. You can't take those herbs now and expect your next period is going to come exactly on time. And the other thing is sometimes herbs work in a particular way that they're trying to recalibrate that brain to ovarian connection and the FSH and the LH. So sometimes the first cycle or two you may see completely change drastically until it recalibrates as well. Mm-hmm. And that's the case with a particular herb like Vitex. You can see sometimes that will change a cycle very quickly for someone. But that's also not the best herb for some PCOS clients as well. So herbal remedies, they work incredibly well. They have to be individualized. Pre-made supplements that are for hormone regulation, I don't always love. And it's because there's some beautiful herbs, like let's think of one that we use, which is called Dongquai. And Dongquai helps to bring more blood flow to the ovaries, and it supports, it anecdotally supports estrogen production and supports the lining as well. If you have a case of a client that then gets a really heavy period, they can't use that particular type of herb. But the rest of the herbs in the formula might be really important for them, and they've taken something over the counter and then they've gotten heavier periods in the following cycles. So your herbs are always dependent first on your symptoms and second based on your blood tests as well. But they can work just as well as medications sometimes. And I was even speaking with, because I have a fertility mentor that I run some really complex cases through sometimes as well. And I was speaking with her last week, and she was saying she works a lot more in premature ovarian failure, and that she works with a fertility specialist in Tasmania. And she was saying that they often find that the herbal remedies work 10 times better than the medical intervention, and they often don't even bother with the medical intervention because it doesn't give them as many beneficial outcomes clinically that they see as they do with herbs.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot to do. You've just got to be compliant.
Yeah, that's so wild. And it is hard to be compliant with herbal medicine because it doesn't taste amazing.
They don't taste nice.
But yeah, it is one of those things that like it is actually really powerful and we underestimate it. I think just the way our society is, we tend to just be programmed that like we go to the doctor. We don't even consider this. So I think it's a really good conversation. You've really touched on how stress and nutrition can really impact things. Talk to me about like sleep and overall lifestyle, maybe if you're like drinking or smoking, like how does that stuff impact things?
Well, that comes into the whole oxidative stress inflammation side of things. So sleep, I don't need to tell anyone that sleep is the most important thing for recovery that we could do, but it's also the point of time in the day that there's a lot of tissue repair. We're reducing a lot of inflammation systemically as well. So if you're lacking melatonin, then instantly that also impacts your egg quality. That's actually a key thing that a lot of fertility specialists that are a little bit more holistically minded will always prescribe their clients melatonin because of how beneficial melatonin is at preserving egg quality. And
I've seen that actually.
Yeah. So again, you're not sleeping, you're not getting good melatonin secretion or maybe not for long enough and you're impacting egg quality in that way. Again, if you're not sleeping, we all know if we lack sleep the next day, our food choices probably aren't as good as they would typically be. You're getting more blood sugar dysregulation again. That's impacting the whole PCOS picture as well. In the case of alcohol and smoking, this is where you're just increasing the toxic load for the liver. And essentially, you're then using up a lot of your antioxidants in the body, like your vitamin C, your vitamin A, your vitamin E, your zinc, selenium, all just to support the detoxification of alcohol and the metabolites from drinking and from smoking. And again, that then has a flow-on effect because you have less antioxidants there to support your egg quality.
Yeah.
The thing with alcohol that I also find is problematic is that clients will, if they've got a high estrogen profile and they're drinking often, their body's not caring about detoxifying that high estrogen during ovulation or post-ovulation. It's worried about detoxifying the poison that's just gone into the body. So that's a huge consideration. And I often always recommend my clients to not drink at least 3 months before trying to conceive. There are some practitioners that, are a little bit more lenient and they say, look, just drink in your follicular phase, don't drink in your ovulation phase. I have a little bit of a different mindset around alcohol in that way. So I think advice is always, it varies with some. I think the ideal picture is always at least 3 months before. And again, like we said before, you're preparing your egg now for 3 months' time. So you want as optimal egg quality. And generally when they're clients that have tried to conceive for a while, they're not even considering having a drink at any point of time. So that conversation's not usually there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm sure there's people that drink every single weekend excessively and fall pregnant, no worries.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And you know what? It is like with everything that I'm saying today, it is the very frustrating thing when it comes to fertility is you have the picture perfect person that's doing everything that they could do and still struggle to conceive. And then you have like other people that are completely reckless, drugs, alcohol, conceive with not even trying. And that is hard. That is hard. So all we can do is focus on the variables that we can try to control and the things that we can see might be causing an issue.
Absolutely. What about under eating and overtraining? How can that impact things?
Well, one, if that's leading to low body weight, then, and we know that's not always the case. Sometimes people can still be within a good healthy weight range, but over exercise and under eat. But if there is a low body weight component, then that's going to be impacting your hormone output as well, because we know some of our estrogen's also made from our fatty tissue as well. So that's one element of it. The other is also just not getting, if you're under eating, you're not getting enough nutrients to actually even support basic mitochondrial function for your eggs. You're not getting enough nutrients there to support hormone output as well. And generally what we see is that picture of high exercise, low intake, the hormone secretion from the brain really starts to drop as well. So we're particularly looking at the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone, so FSH and LH. Generally what we see is they both start to decline because the brain recognizes this is an unsafe environment for a baby. And it recognizes that the body doesn't have enough fuel to provide enough support for the mum, let alone also grow a baby. So what we then see is low hormone output, and then that leads to infrequent ovulation, and that's when you start to see the development of hypothalamic amenorrhea. It's important to know with hypothalamic amenorrhea, sometimes people just see it as irregular, like an irregular menstrual cycle that hasn't come for 6 to 12 months, but you definitely see it in the cases where it's maybe just every 3 to 4 months that they're getting a period. But because they're still getting a period, sometimes they don't recognize that it's hypothalamic amenorrhea, and they might think it's PCOS, reduce their carbs even further, and it's actually not even what they need, or increase their cardio, and it's actually not even what they need.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's so common as well, especially for women that have maybe never worked with a coach, never had nutritional oversight, never tracked their macros. I think the female tendency is to undereat. So even if you're not technically overtraining in the sense that maybe you're exercising 6 times a week and you think, oh yeah, this is normal, this is not excessive. But then if you don't have the fuel to actually match your output, then you are essentially overtraining and undereating.
That's right. And also if there's an element of a very stressful lifestyle to make those 6 sessions actually happen, then you've got the element of stress that's added into the picture.
Yeah, 100%. So if someone has started to track their cycle, they're trying to get familiar with that, they're trying to learn a little bit more about ovulation, like what are the important signs in the case of PCOS for someone to look out for that things are improving?
Yeah. Well, I'll maybe go through, like backtrack a little bit and go through some education around cycle tracking of what to essentially look out for. So when you're trying to identify your fertile window, for some women, they can just use mucus as a sign, so cervical mucus. It's essentially a type of mucus that's produced that can generally last for about 2 to 5 days in the cycle. And it's a type of mucus that you would describe as like an egg white, like a raw egg white. So it's not cooked egg white, a raw egg white. It's see-through, it's slippery. For some people, they just go to the bathroom and their hand slips when they wipe, and that's their sign. They're like, "Yep, that's my I'm fertile at this point in time." So for women that have PCOS, a sign that things are improving is you'll see more opportunities of that in the year, which should then be followed by a period if you weren't trying to conceive in that period of time. So most of the time, if you're on the right track, you'll generally see the cycle will improve even just by a number of a couple days in the month. So if your cycle's usually every 44 days, then the next month might be 37, and that's better than a 44-day cycle. May not be textbook 28. And the reason that I say that is because the cycle before I conceived was about a 42-day cycle. So it still wasn't bang on 28 days.
Oh, wow.
But the cycle that I did conceive, if I didn't conceive, it would have been a 31-day cycle, but I knew exactly when I ovulated, and then that's how I knew when my fertile window was.
Yeah.
So understanding the cervical mucus is the most important thing, and the signs of improvement is that you're seeing changes in that regularity of the cycle, and that if you've got acne as the component as well, that you're seeing a reduction in the amount of new breakouts as well.
Yeah. And would that be reflective of your blood sugar and also your inflammation levels?
Yes,
the acne is improving?
absolutely. And that the testosterone's also coming down as well.
Okay, cool. So what did you do personally to help you conceive?
So, yeah, I conceived at, so I'm 31. So I conceived at 31. I'd say from about 24, 25, I think I was actually coaching maybe with you around that time. And from then until now, I've lost about 15 kilos. So that was, I feel that played a huge role in it, because whether it helped to regulate my cycles or not, it definitely helped to reduce inflammation, because we know if there's excess weight that doesn't need to necessarily be there, then it's going to contribute to some level of inflammation. So that was number one, was a key thing that I had to try to work on that. And that was like, I was a nutritionist, like I am a nutritionist, and I was also qualified then. I was in my mid-20s, so I was just, it was the natural, like, you know, weight crept on because I also moved out of home and I was drinking a lot and I was eating a lot, and it just, Monday to Friday, controlled to a certain extent, but weekends, not so much. So that was number one of what I did. As it got closer, from about maybe a year and a half out, I then started to take a preconception multi. Now, preconception multis are helpful in the sense that they get your nutritional status up to scratch. I don't always see it being a huge game changer for someone that's been trying to conceive for a long time and they're struggling. It's not because they're on the wrong preconception multi. There's usually more.
It's like a 1%er.
Yeah, that's right. But it was one of the most important things that I started off with just to get nutrient levels up to scratch. The other thing that I did was over the course of the last 5 to 6 years, I repeatedly tested my hormones multiple times just so I could see what was going on at that particular stage. And I probably only took it more so seriously with more hormonal or with more herbal interventions in the last 2 years, year and a half to 2 years. And prior to that, it was mostly diet and lifestyle that I was using to try to control it as well. The herbs that I used were always dependent on what was going on with my hormones. So like I said, again, I was using a lot of herbs to try to boost estrogen. So in that last year, I was taking things like shatavari, wild yam, peony, licorice, dong quai. I was also taking curcumin and PA because they're both anti-inflammatory. So I was working a lot on reducing inflammation systemically, particularly because of the adenomyosis component as well. Then as it got even closer, I was taking fish oils for about a year and a half too before. Then as it got closer, I added in other things like vitamin D, more magnesium and so on. And that was more so just, again, to make sure nutritional status was as optimal as it could in the lead up. And because vitamin D is such an important component for immune system regulation, and we know, like I said, implantation, it's an immune-mediated response, so we need enough vitamin D in there. So a lot of the things that I did, diet, lifestyle, herbs, nutrients, there was no medical interventions that I did. And then, of course, I have my partner on board as well. I think as well, beforehand, maybe my mid-20s to up until I met my husband, I would eat out a lot more. Whereas he loves home-cooked stuff.
Yeah.
Hates eating out.
He does a lot of cooking. He has a cooking business.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I've eaten out once in my pregnancy and I got food poisoning and was in hospital the next day. And I was like, God, the one time I eat out, and it was a grilled fish too, so it wasn't anything, terrible. But so Matt eats really well, which I think is also a huge help because obviously it's both of us, like you said before, it takes two. About a year and a half before we started to, we tried to conceive, we both made the decision to not drink alcohol at all, not just for fertility, just an ongoing family decision we've made that we just don't want to drink. So that was, I think, a huge part of it as well, because when we're thinking about DNA of the sperm and sperm quality, that alcohol plays a huge part of that. And that's also the tricky thing because we're in Melbourne and it's such a huge culture. So to get clients to get their partner to not drink is also quite difficult.
Do you know what I think is crazy about this as well? Because alcohol is just so available over the counter, people don't actually understand what it does to our body. I think we all know to a degree, it's not the best thing for our health, but I don't think people realize how it's actually impacting our DNA and things like that.
Absolutely. And I think as well, because it's just so programmed that it's the woman that goes and does the injections and IVF and does all the treatments. So instantly, as soon as the male gets the green flag, everything's okay with the standard semen analysis. There's no more intervention or there's no more discussion around anything that needs to be done for them. So that's what Matt did. But he also took a preconception multi from a year and a half beforehand as well. He was taking fish oils. He took vitamin D. He generally leads quite a healthy lifestyle. He trains more than I do, so he's always very active. And then about 3 months before we were trying to conceive, he stopped going in the sauna. So he was going into the sauna maybe 3-4 times a week. And then I called out. I was like, no more. I said,
I've heard
I'm like,
that's
all right,
not good.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, we're 3 months out now. And then pretty much as soon as I said, we're 3 months out, there was no ifs or buts. He's like, yep, done. No worries. So, but you can guarantee the day that I got a positive pregnancy test, it was straight back in the sauna the next day. So that that's also important. Whether that was a factor or not, whether if he continued to go in the sauna, if it still would have happened, obviously we don't know these variables, but we were just like, well, let's just do what we can. And it's not a huge ask to just be like, don't go in the sauna for the next few months until we conceive. So yeah, they were some of the biggest things of what we did. The basal temperature tracking was something I did as well. So with that, I used Temp Drop. So Temp Drop, it's a little band that you wear on your arm. You wear it in your sleep and it helps to track your temperature. And what happens is after you ovulate, your progesterone rises. And as the progesterone rises, your body temperature also increases as well. So this is really helpful because with PCOS, you can also have attempts at ovulation in the month. So you can see that mucus multiple times and it can trick you. And you're like, yes, that was my fertile window. Oh, no, it wasn't. But when you have the Temp Drop and you're tracking your temperature, you can confirm ovulation has happened. So then that was exactly how I knew that I was pregnant, because on the day that I was supposed to get my period, my temperature should have dropped, but my temperature was the highest it had been in the 2 years that I've recorded my temperature. So that was my sign that I knew. And that helped me month on month confirm my ovulatory window, which was helpful, because you don't just want to then go by the next 2 weeks after you see the mucus being like, is my period coming? Is it not coming? I could actually see, okay, ovulation has happened. Now I just have to wait to see if I have a positive pregnancy test.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. So with Temp Drop, because when I was tracking my BBT, I was using natural cycles and doing like the thermometer in my mouth.
Yeah.
I don't do it anymore. So with my cycle, I'm like what you said before, I'll go to the bathroom, I'll be like slippery, whoop, yep, here we go.
Yep.
But yeah, so for someone who is looking to start tracking that, is that more accurate than the mouth thermometer? Or?
Yeah, I find it's more accurate because when you're tracking through just the standard thermometer, yes, it can track to like the 2 decimal points, which is what you want. But if you have woken up throughout the night, it can be an inaccurate reading. And most people wake up at least once. So with your temperature, if you're going to do it in the morning, just like with the standard thermometer, to have an accurate reading, you have to not have woken up at least 3 to 4 hours before. So if you're woken up at 6 and you've tracked your temperature, but you also woke up at 4 o'clock, then the temperature is invalid. So that's also really tricky because a lot of people wake up a little bit before they usually wake up. And if you have anything like thyroid imbalances or anything, that can really throw off that temperature as well. The Temp Drop is different because it records a temperature throughout the night. So you're getting an average reading of what your temperature is. I'm a frequent wake-upper. So for me, I couldn't use any other thermometer other than the Temp Drop. So for me, that was really helpful because I could wake up 3 times a night and I knew that my recording was going to be accurate.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. It's really good to know about that because I actually hadn't heard of Temp Drop before. I use my Oura Ring now.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like that's really accurate. I don't know if I would 100% rely on it if it was maybe if I was having fertility issues and I wanted like that real close accuracy, but my graphs always seem to be like perfect curves.
I've seen like mixed things. Like sometimes I've had clients that have used the Oura Ring and it's bang on with like other measures that they're using with temperature, and then other times it's a little bit up and down. But yeah, I like the Temp Drop just because it's easy to wear.
Yeah.
And for the investment of what it is, like it's just like, it's really not much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So it sounds like you started supporting your fertility from a very young age. You've obviously always been very aware, but for someone who's maybe a little bit later in life and hasn't lived in such an aware state and made these changes in their 20s, like what would be a realistic timeline to kind of dedicate to priming your body for fertility, would you say?
So the classic timeline, like minimum 3 months. But I think just like you know as well, like when you're working with clients, let's say, for example, that have weight loss and is a variable they need to consider, 3 months might not be enough time and they might want to start considering making those changes 12 months before so they're fully comfortable with a healthy diet and lifestyle before they're starting to conceive as well. So I think the earlier the better. Like if it's on the forefront of your mind, like I said, I myself saw a naturopath before I even met Matt. So it wasn't like I was trying to conceive, but I knew that there were issues that I thought, well, by the time I get there, I don't want to be worrying about how to understand ovulation from the cycle that I'm trying to conceive. I want to know years before that, so it's not an issue. So at least 3 months, I would say up to 12 to 24 months if you know that there's other variables that you really need to work on as well.
Yeah, I think the more time you can dedicate to it, the better. It's only going to be positive. I think this whole conversation will be really good maybe for even some younger girls listening to this that might be in that situation where they don't yet have a partner and they're not actively thinking about conceiving now or in the near future, but just considering what they can start implementing in that space. What would you say to any woman out there listening to this who has been told she might struggle to conceive and is feeling scared about that? What would you say to her?
Always get another opinion, because if I believed that I couldn't conceive when I was 19 and that it was going to be hard, I would have a completely different life right now, you know? And so I think always just make sure you're getting a second opinion and that you're looking at what your options are. There's different forms of medical intervention, like I said before. You've got medical intervention from your doctor, from fertility specialists. You've got intervention through a holistic approach, naturopathically, and you've also got the combination of the two. Like they can also work really well together. So I think if someone doesn't know, where to start and what to do, just kind of making sure you're getting as many options that you can and then making a decision on what feels right.
Yeah, dive deeper and really do your research, I think, 100%.
Yeah.
All right, last question I have for you. I want to circle right back to the start when you were 21 and you were told that you would struggle to conceive. Like, what's something that you wish you could tell your 21-year-old self back then?
Oh, I'd probably just tell them that it was actually completely fine. That like I was able to conceive very quickly, but it's going to take change and a level of commitment to be able to make sustainable lifestyle choices as well. But I think the other thing is that I would probably also tell my 21-year-old self, like, good on you for not going on the pill. Because I think that could have, who knows if I did decide to go on the pill, what the timeline would have, what my hormones would have done after that.
Yeah, 100%. And so many women, like I did go on the pill at that point in my life when the doctor was like, okay, you're of age, go on the pill. And, I was like, okay, that's what we do now. Like we just do it with no information. So I do think that is shifting. I think younger women, in my experience and what I see in clients, like that is shifting and people are so much more aware now. But yeah, it is something that I think we also don't realize can impact our bodies longer term, longer than us just being on it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, I feel like this episode has been incredibly valuable for people. I'm sure there's a lot of women out there that have gotten so much from this, and it's also likely given people a lot of peace of mind that have been told that they will have struggles, that there is actually pathways that they can explore. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
No, it's been great.
Yeah, I will leave your details, so where people can find you and Orenda, your clinic, if people want to reach out for support in their journey, in the show notes, guys. And thank you again, Jacinta. I really appreciate you coming, and we will have you back again in the next episode to chat about your other specialty area, which is skin health.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say.
Yeah, I feel like we could talk for 700 episodes, but amazing. Well, thanks guys for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.